Chapter 31, Bamboo Rafting Around the Island 2. October 29th. As the first light of dawn broke, I packed my belongings and prepared to set off. I had barely slept the previous night, having curled up to fit beneath some stacked reef stones. After a simple breakfast, I resumed my journey. The bamboo raft was now loaded with the items I had collected, the waterline fully submerging its surface. Fortunately, I had secured a half-cut kayak on top, providing enough buoyancy to keep me afloat. I adjusted my direction and began paddling north along the western coastline. I continued until I reached the northernmost point of the island, but I didn't find anything useful. An alarming incident made me break out in a cold sweat. While paddling near the midwestern side of the small island, a triangular shark fin suddenly sliced through the water, moving parallel to my bamboo raft. Fear gripped me, and my legs shook uncontrollably as I paddled frantically. Judging by the fin, the shark was quite large. Luckily, it eventually submerged and disappeared. Perhaps it didn't attack because I had no wounds and it couldn't smell blood. Before long, I reached the northernmost tip of the island, near the volcano. The coastline here became steep, forming cliffs with nearly vertical angles. Large groups of swallows nested in this area. Their bodies were about 13 centimeters long, with dark brown feathers that shimmered blue on their backs, grayish-white bellies, long wings, and small, pale red claws. The cliffs were densely packed with nests, appearing as a blurry mass from a distance. Unlike the nests of northern mud swallows, these were mostly light yellow, with a few red ones mixed in, making them extremely valuable delicacies in our country. If I could sell the swallows' nests from this cliff, I would be a millionaire. However, I had no way to collect these nests. The cliffs were too high, and I lacked the courage to climb them. After lingering for a while, I continued to paddle northeast toward the small island. I was not far from the camp, and since it was still early, I quickened my pace, hoping to return before dark. I didn't bother to eat much, instead nibbling on some sun-dried banana chips to replenish my strength. The banana chips were crispy and sweet, both delicious and effective at providing quick energy. By evening, with the sun still hanging on the horizon, I made it back to the camp. After struggling to push the bamboo raft onto the beach, I carried the items back to my home in 2 trips and then dragged the raft to a spot where it wouldn't be submerged by water, preparing to preserve it for future use. Back at home, I savored a delicious snake meat soup and drank a coconut, then locked the door and fell straight to sleep. October 30th. After 2 days of paddling, I was exhausted and slept soundly until well after sunrise. When I woke up and saw the spoils piled outside the door, I decided to tackle the rusty tools first. I boiled water in 2 pottery jars and tossed in 2 axes and a rusty pair of scissors, letting them cook for about half an hour. The water turned rusty yellow, with some residue floating on the surface and giving off a metallic smell. I checked the axes. The rust had started to soften and flake off. I placed them on a smooth stone and began to polish them. After 2 hours of effort, I managed to remove all the rust, sharpen the edges, and replace the decayed axe handles. Next came the scissors. While I polished the axes, the scissors were still cooking. After taking them out, I bent them slightly, and they were already able to flex. I spent another hour polishing the scissors. While not razor sharp, they could at least cut through leaves. Finally, I turned my attention to the large machete. Thick like a mountain knife, it was relatively simple to handle. I quickly removed all the rust and obtained a sharp blade. With my tools repaired, I used the scissors to cut my long hair. Holding my hair in one hand and the scissors in the other, I had no mirror to see what the style looked like after cutting. It was probably a mess. However, I felt much lighter afterward, and my neck and ears no longer felt itchy. I also trimmed my beard, especially the hair on my upper lip, to avoid chewing on it while eating, which was quite bothersome. Having resolved these issues, I planned to improve my quality of life by increasing the variety and quantity of food. The best way to do this was through planting. So far, I had successfully grown wild yam, which was thriving, but my attempts to plant rice had failed, and the few remaining seedlings would likely not survive. Once the dry season ended, I planned to try again. The most suitable plants to cultivate now were grapes and cacti on the mountain platforms. Both were relatively easy to transplant, and the process was straightforward. Dig up the whole plant while protecting the roots, choose a good location, dig a hole, plant it, and then water it. October 31st, in the clearing in front of my wooden house, I transplanted 5 cacti with sharp thorns. In the forest not far behind the house, I had just planted 10 small grape seedlings under the trees. I didn't transplant the larger seedlings because the grapevines were entwined with other plants, making them difficult to remove and transplant. Chapter 32, A Bee. November 1st, today, a little bee buzzed into my room, flitting about in an endearing way. It instantly reminded me of the large beehive at the broken wall in the backyard. My uncle is a beekeeper, and when I was a child, he taught me how to catch bees with my bare hands. These were bees, not those fierce yellow jackets. As long as you don't pinch them too hard, little bees won't sting you. Suddenly, an idea struck me: could I domesticate a hive of bees? On this trip, I had brought back some woven bags that could be used to catch them. I also had some old fishing nets, perfect for making a bee veil. With my tools almost complete, if I succeeded in beekeeping, I could have a steady supply of honey. The most crucial step in beekeeping is capturing the queen bee. Once the queen is confined, the entire colony will follow, making my beekeeping plan mostly successful. Next, I would need to ensure that both the queen and the colony remained stable and didn't escape. Before capturing the queen, I had to make a beehive to give the bees a place to live. However, crafting a beehive requires beeswax and comb, so I first needed to excavate a bee colony, which meant not catching the bees right away. This would make things easier. Soon, I organized my gear, packed a bag full of hay, and carried a large iron bucket containing 5 pottery jars for the honey. An axe and a machete hung from my waist, and I held a spear for protection, leaving the bow and arrows behind as they were too heavy and unnecessary. With everything ready, I set off. I was already familiar with the path to the backyard, and before long, I reached the big tree near the cliff. Fortunately, this tree grew at the base of the cliff. If it had been at the top, I wouldn't have been able to deal with the beehive. I started a fire at the base of the tree, using dry grass to ignite some pieces of wood. Once the flames stabilized, I added some damp grass, creating thick smoke that billowed upward. I moved the fire to the right position to ensure the smoke reached the beehive. The bees swarmed out as if their home had exploded. I took out my axe and began chopping the tree. Yes, my goal was only honey and beeswax, so I could afford to be a bit crude. The tree was half dead, making it easy to chop down. In less than half an hour, the tree swayed dangerously. I kicked the trunk hard, and with a sharp crack, the tree fell to the ground. Surprisingly, the beehive remained intact on the branch without being crushed. At that moment, the swarm flew around like a storm, creating a truly frightening scene. I felt a surge of panic and hurriedly stuffed the beehive into the iron bucket and ran away. I had left the 5 pottery jars behind, planning to return for them after the swarm dispersed. As I jogged away, I suddenly tripped over something and fell to the ground. Fortunately, the beehive didn't spill out. Looking back, I saw it was a rabbit's burrow. My irritation immediately subsided a bit, and I thought I would come back to deal with them later. I hid behind a tree about 200 meters away from the swarm, observing the bees. Holding a piece of the beehive in my hand, I took a bite, and honey oozed out. The first sensation wasn't sweetness but rather the fragrance of flowers, followed by a refreshing sweetness that wasn't cloying at all. Instead, it was uplifting. Compared to the honey bought in the city, this was an entirely different world. The air and environment on the island were so pure that even the honey felt exceptionally special. Before I knew it, that piece of honey filled me with an unprecedented sense of happiness, lifting my spirits. Perhaps this was what people often referred to as the joy brought by sweets. After about 20 minutes, the swarm gradually dispersed, leaving only a few bees behind. I returned to the tree with my iron bucket and began processing the beehive. I smashed the outer shell of the hive, revealing the golden honeycomb inside. I counted a total of 7 pieces of varying sizes, each about 2 fingers wide. I first removed the larvae from the hive. Although they looked like maggots, these bee pupae were quite delicious. Next, I squeezed the honey into the jars, filling 2 pottery jars to the brim. The remaining beeswax was packed separately into another jar, an important material for making the beehive later. After collecting my spoils, I headed home with the honey and beeswax. It was only then that I realized I had been stung by bees above my right eye and on my arm. both throbbing slightly, with noticeable swelling. Chapter 33, Building the Beehive. November 2nd. Today, I embarked on the journey of building a beehive. While some might assume that a beehive is merely a simple box for tossing in bees, it is, in reality, a complex structure, requiring careful design of its many internal components. I began by constructing several uniformly sized frames. This process was straightforward. I joined 4 narrow wooden boards to create a rectangle. These frames serve the vital purpose of holding the comb in place. When it comes time to harvest honey, I can easily remove the frames and cut the honeycomb to collect the sweet nectar. Next, I sought out fresh timber and split it into boards of various sizes for the main hive, supers, and lids. With a bamboo ruler, I measured the dimensions and marked them with charcoal before cutting along the lines with a machete. The boards didn't need to be overly thick. I kept their thickness around 3 centimeters. Finally, I assembled the boards into 2 hive bodies, carving a small notch about 1 centimeter high at the bottom to serve as the entrance. I stacked the 2 hive bodies on top of each other, inserting a queen excluder in the middle to prevent the queen from entering the upper section. The queen lays her eggs in the lower section, while the upper section is dedicated to honey production. The frames were then placed in the upper hive body. Once the hive bodies were complete, I heated beeswax and evenly applied it to the walls of the hive, masking the wood scent and helping the bees acclimate to their new environment. I placed a piece of comb that I had saved into the frame, forming a honey-filled comb frame. With all parts of the beehive assembled, this bee paradise was nearly complete. As for the hive's location, after some thought, I decided to set it in the backyard. The area was abundant with flowers, creating an excellent foraging environment for the bees. Additionally, this placement would keep the bees from interfering with my daily life. 2 hours later, I arrived at the grassy area of the backyard with the beehive. I cleared a patch of land with a shovel and positioned the hive next to a cluster of flowers, where many bees were already buzzing back and forth to collect nectar. I hoped these bees would be drawn to the newly constructed hive, though I knew it was unlikely the queen would enter on her own. I would need to find a new hive and capture her. After setting up the hive, I wandered around looking for signs of a bee colony. While I didn't find a hive this time, I stumbled upon several rabbit burrows and spotted a few large, gray-brown rabbits. They darted away quickly. There was no chance of catching them with a bow. This encounter sparked the idea of raising rabbits, which would not only provide a steady source of meat but also add some enjoyment to my life. To catch the rabbits, I planned to create a snare trap. I would weave a bamboo basket and prop up one corner with a stick, placing bait inside. Once the rabbit nudged the stick, the basket would fall, trapping it inside. November 3rd. Today, I made 3 bamboo basket traps and positioned them at the entrances of the rabbit burrows, using wild vegetables and fresh tender grass as bait. November 4th. Today, I finally found a suitable hive to capture. I had discovered another one yesterday, but it was perilously located high in a tree on the edge of a cliff, making it difficult to climb and chop down. If the hive fell, the bees would scatter everywhere. Today's hive was situated on a low tree in the woods, easily reachable by stepping on a wooden stake. The hive wasn't large, making extraction relatively easy. I filled a woven bag with bees, nearly transporting the entire hive while ensuring the queen was included. In the evening, I poured the bees into the bottom box of the hive. At this point, the bees were in a dormant state, moving little, which helped avoid startling the colony. I quickly covered the hive and placed a bottle of diluted honey water in the top box to nourish the bees. With this step completed, my initial venture into beekeeping was a success. If, in the following days, the worker bees ventured out to forage for nectar, it would indicate they had begun building their nest and producing honey within the hive. After the queen lays her eggs, the larvae take about 21 days to hatch. As long as I find larvae after 21 days, I can consider my colony fully domesticated. This marked my first foray into animal husbandry since arriving on the island, and I plan to gradually expand this endeavor, though that was a matter for the future. November 5th. After breakfast this morning, I eagerly made my way to the backyard to check on the beehive. The sound of buzzing bees welcomed me as many bees flew in and out of the entrance, reassuring me. I had worried throughout the night, fearing I would find all the bees had escaped by morning. I had intentionally made the entrance and lid of the hive small, allowing ordinary bees to come and go freely while preventing the queen from escaping. As long as the queen remained, this colony of bees would not disperse. I settled beside the beehive and spent the day observing the bees diligently at work. At noon, I returned to camp to cook a salted fish. The dry season was becoming increasingly apparent, and collecting water now required climbing to a water hole halfway up the mountain. Fortunately, I had an ample supply of plastic bottles, making water collection relatively straightforward. In the afternoon, I checked the 3 bamboo basket traps and found they had all been triggered, but unfortunately, I hadn't caught a single rabbit. I crafted 2 new traps and set them beside the rabbit burrows. Recently, the rockfall traps in the woods had been yielding good results, averaging a catch every 1 to 2 days. One day, I even caught 3 field mice and a squirrel. In contrast, the rope traps and pit traps on the hillside continued to yield nothing. I was gradually losing faith in them, shifting from daily checks to only once every 3 or 4 days. Chapter 34, The Rabbit Hutch. November 6th. Today, I decided to begin constructing a rabbit hutch, with plans to raise wild rabbits. The design was simple. I marked out an area of about 10 square meters, roughly 100 meters from the cabin. I gathered a few pieces of wood and drove in wooden stakes approximately 1.8 meters tall at each corner of the plot. Then, I arranged thin wooden planks vertically, inserting them into the ground to form a wooden wall about 1 meter high. I topped it off with a thatched roof. Once the hutch was complete, I remembered that rabbits are adept diggers. To prevent them from tunneling out, I collected gravel and evenly spread it across the hutch's floor. To give you a visual, the rabbit hutch stands about as tall as I am, with wooden walls rising 1 meter high, allowing me to see inside from outside. 4 1.8 meter tall wooden posts support the roof, framed with bamboo and covered with large leaves and dry grass, all secured with vines. I left one wall open for an entrance, which I fitted with a simple wooden door. November 8th. It took 2 days to finish building the hutch, and today I started capturing wild rabbits. The bamboo basket traps I had crafted earlier were frequently triggered, yet I hadn't caught a single rabbit. I suspected this was due to the rabbits being too cautious and the baskets being too small and lightweight. So, I spent the entire morning weaving 3 large bamboo baskets and then took them to the backyard to set up the traps again. This time, I improved the design by using 3 thin wooden sticks to support the bamboo baskets, connecting the sticks with grass ropes. As soon as a rabbit touched the grass rope, the sticks would fall, and the basket would trap the rabbit underneath. I then devised a plan to smoke the rabbits out of their burrows. They say, a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows, and indeed, I discovered that these rabbit holes had multiple entrances. I located several interconnected holes and set traps at their exits. At one downwind entrance, I lit some dry grass and added a bit of damp grass to create thick smoke. I continuously fanned it with large leaves, forcing the smoke deep into the burrow. After about an hour, just when I thought there were no rabbits in this hole, I noticed one of the bamboo baskets shaking vigorously nearby. I rushed over to find a wild rabbit struggling inside, desperately trying to escape. I quickly moved to hold down the basket. The wild rabbit was surprisingly strong, but I managed to keep it pinned. Once it calmed down a bit, I lifted one corner of the basket to reach for it, only to feel a sharp pain in my hand. This little guy bit me hard, drawing blood. Infuriated, I quickly removed my vest to wrap my hand before grabbing the rabbit again, finally managing to subdue it. This rabbit weighed about 3 pounds and looked quite wild, with fierce eyes. After that, I checked the other baskets. Approaching the second trap, I noticed some movement inside. Lifting it, I was pleasantly surprised to find a small rabbit weighing less than a pound. It was fluffy and much calmer, allowing me to catch it without resistance. The more I looked at it, the cuter it appeared, and I started thinking about giving it a name. At that moment, 2 more rabbits darted out from a nearby entrance, quickly escaping into the grass. I suspected that this hole was a rabbit kingdom, home to many more residents. Continuing my search, I managed to catch a 4-pound wild rabbit as well. In total, I captured 3 rabbits, returning home with my bounty and placing them in the newly built hutch. The 3 rabbits struggled a bit when they first entered, but soon realized they couldn't escape and settled down in a corner. I prepared some tender grass and wild vegetables for them, but they remained still, likely still adjusting to their new environment. I also crafted a simple water trough filled with fresh water for them to drink. In the afternoon, I went to the beach to forage for food. Although I was getting weary of salted fish, I continued drying it out since it made for decent long-term storage. When I returned that evening, I noticed that the little rabbit had started hopping around the hutch and was less fearful of me. In contrast, the other two adult rabbits were still huddled in the corner. I decided to give the little rabbit a name. Watching it joyfully bounce around, I initially thought to call it Bouncy, but that seemed too ordinary. Then, inspired by the sunset illuminating the distant peaks, I decided to name it Little Ewer. From then on, every time I fed it, I would call out, "Little Ewer, it's time to eat." This little rabbit gradually became my pet, even moving into my cabin. Although it couldn't talk, it became the first companion I could confide in since arriving on the island. Chapter 35, The Bear. November 9th, the rabbits I raised still refuse to eat, and I suspect they're too lonely. So, I decided to head to the backyard again and use yesterday's method to catch more rabbits. By the end of the day, I managed to catch 7 wild rabbits. At noon, I selected the largest one for lunch, while the remaining 6 were placed in the rabbit hutch. Sure enough, with new members added, the rabbit group became a bit more active, but they still didn't eat much. November 10th. Today, I was thrilled to find some signs of nibbling on the tender grass I had fed the rabbits. Although it was just a small portion, it proved that my rabbits had finally begun to eat. Especially little Ewer, I even saw it crouching by the water trough drinking, which filled my heart with joy. I observed the rabbits all morning. After lunch, I went to the beehive and found more and more bees returning with nectar, buzzing loudly inside the hive. The continuous good news lifted my spirits, and I began to contemplate what other animals I could raise. Suddenly, I thought about digging a pond behind the cabin to raise fish. But then I felt a bit foolish. There are countless fish to catch in the nearby ocean, why waste time and effort digging a pond? In fact, I have always wanted to raise goats. If I could have a herd of goats, it would not only improve my diet occasionally but also provide fresh and nutritious goat milk. Unfortunately, I have yet to find any signs of goats. These animals must have their own range of activity, but I've been so busy raising rabbits that I've neglected to explore the island. So far, the area I've developed is quite limited. Aside from paddling around the island, I haven't visited most places. The island must still hide many resources waiting for me to discover. However, I don't plan to explore the southern area for now, as I found leopard tracks there. I would prefer never to encounter such creatures in my lifetime. I also thought about the large freshwater lake on the island and was eager to see it, but at the same time, I worried that there might be brown bears or other large animals there, which put me in a dilemma. In the end, curiosity won over fear. I had a powerful bow and arrow and a sharp machete in hand, and even if I did encounter a large animal, the outcome was uncertain. Moreover, perhaps because this island is seldom visited by humans, all the animals I encountered seemed curious about me and didn't show any fear or aggression. This is a positive sign. Tonight, I organized my gear, preparing to set off early tomorrow morning to explore the lake. November 11th. Today is Double 11, also known as Singles Day. I couldn't help but smile, thinking that if I were still in human society, I might be lying in bed at midnight, frantically shopping on my phone. Shaking my head, I pushed aside these random thoughts, shouldered my pack, and set off. I got slightly lost, unable to recall the exact location of the lake, so I could only rely on my instincts to head northwest. With the machete in hand, I continuously cleared the overgrown grass and branches ahead. This machete made traversing the forest much easier. By noon, I still couldn't pinpoint the location of the lake. So, I decided to change direction and head north towards the mountains. After all, getting trapped in the woods at night would be very dangerous. Exploration always brings rewards, and this time, I was pleasantly surprised. On the path north, I first discovered a wild lemon tree. I can say that almost everyone has drunk lemonade, but few have seen a lemon tree. This lemon tree wasn't tall, it had a short, thick trunk, with drooping branches adorned with greenish-yellow small lemons. These wild lemons were half the size of those from the supermarket. I picked one, cut it open, and took a lick. It was so sour that my face scrunched up, but the refreshing lemon fragrance invigorated my spirit. Lemons are not only a great source of vitamins but also have a longer shelf life. I picked over 20 and stuffed them into my backpack, continuing northward. An hour later, I reached a hillside and was greeted by a patch of plants resembling bamboo. Indeed, I had discovered wild sugarcane. This patch of sugarcane grew very densely, the canes were thin and long. Although they were not as juicy as cultivated sugarcane, they contained more minerals and were quite sweet. I cut down 2 canes, chopped them into sections, and tied them between my backpack and back with vines. The sugarcane was heavy, and I could only carry so much. I planned to return next time with a lighter load to bring back more. I imagined how delightful it would be to extract sugar from the sugarcane and mix it with a glass of sweetened lemonade. Carrying the sugarcane slowed my pace significantly. By evening, I finally reached the rocky path I had traversed during my last climb. Here, the trees were sparse and relatively safe, so I hurriedly built a fire and rested around the campfire. Late at night, I added a few large logs to the fire, preparing to lie down for rest when I suddenly heard a rustling noise coming from the woods. I immediately tensed up, grabbed my machete and bow, and fixed my gaze on the source of the sound. The rustling in the grass grew more frequent, and judging by the noise, the animal making the commotion was quite large. I deduced it could be a wild boar or a brown bear because if it were a goat or a leopard, it wouldn't make such a loud noise. Rustle, 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 the sound got closer, and my nerves were on high alert, my eyes wide open, fixated on the darkness. Suddenly, a pair of green eyes appeared before me. Those eyes stared at me like a hungry wolf, and the footsteps stopped. That creature was locking eyes with me. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was shaking all over, adrenaline surging, and I was almost about to wet myself. I was genuinely afraid that it was a wolf, and images of myself being devoured by wolves flashed through my mind. Time seemed to freeze as the creature slowly approached. Finally, I could see it clearly. It was a massive brown bear. The brown bear's enormous figure was illuminated by the firelight, its fur reflecting a faint glow like steel needles. I was completely paralyzed, lacking the strength to run away. Moreover, once I stepped out of the fire's light, I would see nothing. I was so scared I wet my pants, but at that moment, I couldn't care about shame. My mind was blank, and all I could hear was a buzzing in my ears. I thought I might be done for this time. However, after a while, the brown bear did not charge at me. It walked into the firelight, paused, and lowered its head to sniff the ground, like a small dog. I looked at it in confusion. It didn't seem to have any intention of attacking me and appeared a bit curious instead. After regaining some strength, I suddenly had an idea. I slowly opened my backpack and took out a piece of salted fish. Upon seeing my movement, the brown bear immediately stopped and looked at me. I gently tossed the salted fish in front of it. At first, it stepped back a bit, then slowly approached to sniff the fish, took a bite, and turned to disappear into the woods. I let out a long breath and slumped onto the ground. That tension finally dissipated, and my ears returned to normal. I then noticed the wetness in my pants, but I felt no shame, only endless relief. The brown bear wasn't trying to eat me, it was attracted by the smell of the salted fish. I began to doubt the saying, wild animals fear fire, might be misleading. Chapter 36, Sugar Making. November 12th. After the encounter with the brown bear last night, I couldn't sleep a wink, my heart uneasy with the fear that the bear might return. Fortunately, things didn't worsen. At dawn, I made my way back down the mountain. When I returned to the camp, it was already morning. I had a piece of sugarcane for breakfast before heading home to close the door and take a much-needed nap. When I finally woke up again, it was getting late outside. I walked over to the rabbit hutch and found that the food I had given the rabbits yesterday had been completely devoured. So, I gathered some tender grass and wild vegetables from the forest to feed them and cleaned up the rabbit droppings scattered on the ground. November 13th. This morning, as I passed the drying rack, I suddenly noticed that several pieces of salted fish were missing. Nearby, a row of huge footprints caught my eye. In an instant, I recalled the brown bear from yesterday. It had actually followed me to the camp and stolen my salted fish. I couldn't believe that such a massive creature would dare to do something like this. To my surprise, it was quite polite about it, only taking 2 or 3 pieces of fish without damaging my drying rack at all. Today, I dedicated the entire day to building a fence around my little house. November 15th. After 2 days of hard work, I finally completed the fence. Although it was a bit rough due to the time constraints, at least I now had a simple barrier to keep the bears at bay. November 16th, when I woke up this morning, I discovered that part of the fence had been knocked down. I was certain it was that greedy brown bear again, and 2 more pieces of salted fish were missing from the drying rack. I couldn't help but laugh. This big guy was impossible to stop with just a fence. I decided not to worry about it. After all, this creature was robbing without violence, merely taking a few pieces of salted fish, which wasn't too bad for me. I considered setting some traps near the drying rack, but upon further reflection, there really weren't any suitable traps to catch it, and even if I did catch it, I wouldn't be able to deal with it. In the evening, I observed the drying rack from the window. Soon after, darkness fell, and a figure emerged in the east. By the light of the fire, I saw a massive brown bear sneaking over the fence, approaching the drying rack. It raised its head to sniff the dried fish above. Confirming its target, it stood on its hind legs and bit down on 2 pieces of fish. First, it enjoyed one right there, then took the other one away in its mouth. I was speechless. This creature had fresh fish but still preferred the taste of salted fish. Fortunately, it didn't seem interested in me inside the wooden house, not even glancing in my direction. November 17th. Today, I checked the beehive and opened the upper box. Sure enough, the bees had started building their nest, with neat combs appearing in the frames. It won't be long before I can enjoy the honey I've been nurturing. Of the 5 cacti I transplanted in front of the door, 4 survived, and out of 10 small grapevines, 8 made it. Due to the recent lack of rain, I've been watering them every 3 or 4 days, and these little seedlings have grown quite a bit. I estimate they'll bear fruit soon. I had long finished the snake meat I dried last time. Its tender taste was unforgettable. So today, I decided to head into the forest and try my luck. With all my gear in hand, hunting a few small snakes would be a piece of cake. I took my bow and machete into the forest, constantly searching for their silhouettes among the grass and branches. About an hour later, I caught 5 small snakes, 3 green bamboo snakes and 2 unidentified gray-brown snakes with black patterns. These 5 snakes weren't large, with the longest being just over a meter. I once thought about raising snakes, but then I realized they are cold-blooded animals, and their smooth bodies would be impossible to contain, so I dismissed that idea. When I returned to the camp, I cooked the largest snake. I discarded the head to prevent any possible venom. I used half of the snake meat to make soup and grilled the other half, enjoying a delicious meal. The snake meat was indeed tender and tasty. Although the grilled snake was also delicious, it was slightly inferior in texture. The meat of these small snakes was not as good as the green water python before, being lean and lacking in fat. In the afternoon, I decided to try making sugar with the remaining sugarcane, about 1 stalk. I smashed the sugarcane and squeezed out the juice, which I put into a pottery jar to boil. This wild sugarcane didn't yield much juice. From 1 stalk, I only got about 3 fingers worth of liquid. After boiling for a while, the sugarcane juice began to bubble. I occasionally moved the jar away from the fire to control the temperature and prevent burning. The juice gradually turned a reddish brown and emitted a rich sweet aroma. After about 10 minutes, only a thin layer of syrup remained at the bottom of the jar. I took the jar off the fire and set it aside to cool. After a while, I pressed my finger gently on the liquid at the bottom and found that it had started to solidify. I found a sharp little stone and lightly tapped the solids. Soon, they broke apart. I poured the fragments into a bamboo tube and continued to crush them until they turned into tiny granules. This was sugar. I couldn't wait to boil a pot of water and poured the sugar into a cup, using the water to dissolve it all at once. Then, I stirred with chopsticks. The dissolved sugar water turned red, resembling brown sugar water, with some sugarcane residue still present. After letting it cool for a bit, I took a sip. It tasted somewhat like brown sugar water, very sweet and delicious. I cut a lemon into slices and placed them into the cooled sugar water. After waiting for the lemon juice to seep out, I tasted it and found it was sour and sweet. The sweetness of the sugar water blended beautifully with the sourness and fragrance of the lemon, tasting much better than the milk tea I used to buy. November 18th. I spent the entire day making sugar. To improve the efficiency of transporting the sugarcane, I crafted a shoulder pole from thick bamboo, emptied my backpack to carry the sugarcane, and only took a large machete in hand. After a short time, I managed to carry back about 70 to 80 pounds of sugarcane, and now it was time to extract the juice and make more sugar. These sugarcanes only yielded 20 to 30 pounds of juice, not even half their weight, and from that juice, I ended up with about 2 pounds of sugar. However, this sugar would last me for a while, and I stored it in a clean plastic bottle. Suddenly inspired, I picked 2 coconuts to try making sugar from coconut water. Surprisingly, I managed to create coconut sugar. However, the sugar yield from the coconut water was pitifully low, and the sugar produced wasn't as sweet as that made from sugarcane. Chapter 37, New Members Join. November 19th. For the foreseeable future, I plan to devote all my time to stockpiling supplies. This includes crafting more pottery, producing charcoal, refining additional sugar and salt, and drying out more fish, snake meat, and banana leaves. I also want to experiment with air drying grapes to prolong their shelf life, as many of the grapes on the hillside platform have rotted after ripening, which feels like such a waste. With a sufficient food supply, I can live more comfortably on this island, freeing up time and energy to explore other pursuits. My life has settled into a routine, almost like a job. I wake up in the morning, have breakfast, and then start working. At noon, when the sun is at its peak, I take a break for lunch, return to work in the afternoon, and finally head home to sleep at sunset. This cycle has persisted day after day for nearly half a month. December 5th. After this dedicated period of labor, I've managed to produce over 50 pottery jars, 5 large water tanks, more than 100 pounds of charcoal, 2 jars of sugar, 4 jars of salt, 5 jars of dried banana leaves, 3 jars of raisins, and over 30 strips of dried snake meat. Despite a few salted fish being pilfered by the thief, I still have more than 60 left. During this time, I've surprisingly become somewhat familiar with a brown bear. The day before yesterday, just before sunset, it wandered close to my fence. I was in the shelter gathering dried banana leaves when I heard a noise and turned around to find it there. By then, my fear had subsided. I stood up, approached the drying rack, and tossed 2 pieces of dried salted fish to it. As usual, it devoured one immediately and carried the other away in its mouth. This bear is truly intelligent, displaying behavior more akin to a gentleman, showing no signs of aggression. Of course, it could be that I haven't provoked it. Over time, I've grown accustomed to its presence, and sometimes, I even find myself missing it when I can't see it. As for the 9 rabbits I kept, only 8 remain. One rabbit had a fierce temperament and stubbornly refused to eat. I couldn't bear to let it suffer from hunger, so I ended its life early. It was the same one that had bitten me before. I swear this was not an act of revenge. After skinning it and preserving its fur, I treated myself to a delightful meal of rabbit soup. Among the rabbits, Xiao Yuer stands out as the most obedient and adorable. I feed it separately each time, and it has grown accustomed to eating from my hand. Whenever I call out, "Xiao Yuer, time to eat," it eagerly jumps in front of me. I've even tried picking it up, and it doesn't resist. Petting its fluffy little head fills me with warmth. I created a small nest for Xiao Yuer inside the wooden house using bamboo strips, lining it with a thick layer of grass. It loves its new home and happily runs into sleep at night. I even took it to the creek and gave it a bath with charcoal ash. Afterward, its fur became even fluffier and smoother. I hold it almost every day, chatting with it as I would a friend, saying things like, "Good morning, Xiao Yuer, time to eat," and "Good night, Xiao Yuer." I truly cherish this little partner. December 6th. As I've been crafting more items, the wooden house has started to feel a bit cramped. I've decided to build a storage shed next to it. While it doesn't need to be as sturdy as the house, it must be rainproof. Although it hasn't rained much lately, I suspect the rainy season is fast approaching. The framework of the storage shed resembles a yurt. First, I marked out a circle on the ground with a diameter of 5 meters and a height of over 2 meters, then I inserted 16 bamboo poles, securing them around the edge of the circle. I used vines to attach thinner branches to the bamboo, gradually bending them inward until the top formed a pointed structure. After that, I secured palm leaves and dry grass to the frame, layering them from the bottom up. To enhance its rainproof quality, I mixed yellow clay, crushed oyster shells, and charcoal, applying this mixture to the exterior of the shed. Though the shed may look a bit unsightly, once the mud dries, its rainproof effectiveness will be significantly improved. I laid down some large stones on the floor inside, sprinkled sand from the beach, and finally covered everything with split bamboo. I then moved the excess pottery jars and items into the shed, crafting a simple wooden door. December 9th. Building the storage shed took 3 days, finally providing me with ample space to store food and tools, which means I can allocate more time to other tasks. Today, I decided to venture into the back garden to search for bird nests. The thrill of outdoor exploration excited me. After shooting a bird that resembled a dove, I began to climb trees in search of eggs. To my surprise, many of the eggs in the nests were already broken, replaced by nests full of soft, pink baby birds. Seeing those nearly featherless chicks tugged at my heartstrings, and I found myself unable to disturb them. After climbing to the 13th tree, I finally discovered a nest constructed from dry grass. Inside were 5 fluffy little birds, their light feathers and jewel-like black eyes sparkling. 4 of them curiously gazed at me, while one mistook me for its mother, opening its tiny mouth and begging for food. These little creatures are utterly fascinating, especially the one that eagerly sought nourishment. On a whim, I decided to take this little foodie with me. I carefully cradled it in my hands, and it seemed blissfully unaware that it had been captured, still begging for food. Upon returning home, I crafted a birdcage for it using woven bamboo strips, lining it with soft grass. Though it's not as exquisite as a bird mother's nest, the little one doesn't seem to mind, exploring its new home with curiosity. Next, I ventured into the woods to find food for my new companion. I dug up 2 earthworms, caught 2 grasshoppers, and picked some nightshade berries. Unsure which it would prefer, I fed it each one in turn. To my delight, this little one devoured everything without hesitation, its tiny belly swelling yet still begging for more. I named it Kang Kang, hoping it will grow up healthy and happy, sharing my life on this deserted island. Chapter 38, Friction Fire. December 10th. As I mentioned earlier, the magnesium fire starter sent by the production team has dwindled to about 1/3 of its original size. After using it for some time, only a small piece remains. Therefore, I've decided to stop using the magnesium fire starter from today onward, unless I encounter special circumstances, such as staying overnight outside or in case of emergencies. It's time for me to practice friction fire. In the first chapter of my story, I talked about the challenges of friction fire, and to this day, I have yet to successfully start a fire using this method. Don't be deceived by the videos online that make it look simple. In reality, very few people can achieve a fire this way. Unless someone is exceptionally skilled, most of those videos rely on production effects or clever editing. To successfully create fire through friction, one must have thick calluses on their palms and strong, muscular arms. Fortunately, after spending time working on this deserted island, while my arms haven't become bulky, they have gained definition and strength, and my palms have toughened up and become resilient. I found a piece of dry wood and used an axe to carve a small notch in it. Then, I took a straight stick and pressed it against the notch, vigorously rubbing the stick back and forth, trying to generate enough heat through friction to ignite the shavings and dry grass beneath. I rubbed intensely for about 10 minutes, my arms were aching, and my palms had reddened, but there was still no sign of a spark at the notch. After increasing my speed for another 5 minutes, I finally saw a wisp of white smoke. Unable to hold on any longer, I had to take a break. Upon closer inspection, I noticed the notch was slightly charred and felt quite warm to the touch. It seemed that if I had persisted just a little longer, I would have produced sparks. After a half-hour rest, I decided to switch to a denser piece of wood to try again. This time, I adopted a rhythmic rubbing technique, pausing every 6 rubs. Sure enough, this approach proved to be much more effective. Soon, white smoke began to rise from the notch, and as I quickened my pace, the white smoke turned black, and dark particles fell onto the tinder. I quickly and carefully cupped the smoldering tinder in my hands and gently blew on it. Finally, the sparks ignited, and a small flame appeared. This was my first successful fire from friction, and I was incredibly excited. However, I quickly realized that this method wasn't practical for daily use. After all, if I were to eat 3 cooked meals each day, I would have to start a fire 3 times. Even with my improved physical fitness, I couldn't sustain that frequency for long. So, I decided to create a simple fire starting device. First, I found a nearly round stone and chiseled a small hole in the center to serve as a socket. Then, I took a flexible stick about 40 centimeters long to fashion a bow. To better wrap the fire stick, I unraveled a piece of nylon rope to serve as the bowstring. After fitting the fire stick into the notch of the wood, I began to pull the bow back and forth at a steady pace. Soon, I saw sparks and successfully ignited the dry grass. Although this method isn't as convenient as the magnesium fire starter, it is relatively more efficient and requires less effort. I recalled a news article one had read. In 1983, sapphire deposits were discovered in the basalt mountains along the eastern coast. Local shepherds even used sapphires to strike fires and smoke, and those sapphires later became valuable treasures. Considering the volcano to the north, I plan to take a shovel to the summit in the future to see if I can find sapphires or other gems. Although they hold no practical value on this deserted island, the fire's starting capability of sapphires is significant enough for me. However, anything is possible. If one day I returned to human society and happened to collect a pile of gems, perhaps I could use that wealth to become a millionaire. Chapter 39, Road Construction Plan. December 11th. I have been preoccupied with various tasks lately, which has delayed my exploration of the island. It has now been 6 months since I first set foot on this land, yet I still haven't fully mapped its terrain. The island is vast and features a complex landscape, especially with the extensive rainforest that makes me reluctant to venture too deep, let alone spend the night there. During my last ascent to the summit, I discovered that over 60% of the island is shrouded in rainforest. If I want to explore this island thoroughly, I must confront these challenges. After considerable thought, I decided on a safer and more practical approach, road construction. My plan is to carve paths through the forest, clearing trees, weeds, and rocks along the way. Additionally, I intend to build a simple shelter at the end of each day's journey for overnight stays. Once this idea took root, I felt it was entirely feasible. Though it will require a significant investment of time, this method will allow me to gradually and safely explore the entire island, granting me a sense of control over it. I found a wooden board and used charcoal as my drawing tool. Drawing on my memories from my previous ascent and circumnavigation of the island, I roughly sketched the island's outline on the board, marking my current location. On the map, I represented my dwelling with a small house symbol and indicated the mountains to the north, along with the location of the backyard. I then drew a line between the small house and the backyard, marking the beginning of my road construction plan. This route is the area I know best, making it relatively easier to clear. I gathered my gear, ensuring I had enough food and fresh water, along with an axe, shovel, and machete. As I followed the route to the backyard, I marked the trees that needed to be cut down, trying to maintain a straight path. However, when I encountered thick trees or complicated terrain, I had to navigate around them. After half a day of marking, I finally reached the backyard and began chopping down trees. Fortunately, the trees I selected were relatively small, which made them easier to fell. December 16th. After 5 days of diligent work, I had cleared all the trees along this path, leaving only small stumps behind. I didn't intend to waste time uprooting these stumps. Next, I focused on clearing the vines and branches that cluttered the way. With my machete in hand, I swung through the jungle, feeling a rush of relief as if I were engaged in battle. I even shouted, "Ha! Who? Take that." Perhaps it was due to spending too much time alone, but even with Xiao Yuer and Kong Kong keeping me company, I still felt a tinge of loneliness. Perhaps I became too absorbed in the task. Within a day, I had cleared all the obstacles. Then, using the shovel, I pushed the weeds, cut branches, and vines to the sides of the path. This step took 3 days, and finally, on December 20th, I completed the first road on the island. I walked back and forth along the newly cleared path and found that my travel time had significantly decreased. Moreover, I no longer had to worry about being bitten by snakes or insects hidden in the grass, which made me feel much safer. During the road construction, I didn't forget to feed my little companions. Xiao Yuer has grown quite a bit. While it's not as adorable as it was in its younger days, it remains well-behaved and obedient. Kong Kong has developed much fuller wings and can now perch on its claws. I inserted a small stick into its cage, and it loves to sit atop it. Kong Kong appears to be a budgerigar, and as it matures, its colors have become richer, primarily yellow-green, accented with light brown, yellow, and black feathers. Its personality is lively. Every time I feed it, it flutters onto my hand, joyfully flapping its wings. I attempted to let it fly freely inside the house. It zoomed around me in circles, occasionally landing on my head, which made me laugh heartily. However, I didn't dare take it outside for fear it might fly away, so I could only let it soar a few circles indoors, while most of the time it had to remain in its cage. I have been trying to teach it to say, Kong Kong, but it hasn't learned that yet. Next, I plan to construct another road leading to the chestnut tree, which has begun to bear green fruit again. Thanks to the island's warm climate, the plants bear fruit year-round, which is undoubtedly good news. I will follow the same method as before, marking the route, cutting trees, and clearing the path. This has gradually become my daily routine. On December 21st, I harvested the first batch of honey from the beehive. Due to the climate, the bees on the island work hard year-round, and the hive is already filled with thick honey. I carefully removed 3 pieces of honeycomb, filling half a jar with golden nectar. Coincidentally, the day after I harvested my first batch of honey, I encountered my future closest companion, and the food it loves most is honey. Chapter 40, Plush Toy. December 22nd. Today is Sunday, my designated day of rest, so I decided to take the opportunity to relax completely. After waking up in the morning, I greeted Xiao Yuer and Kong Kong, saying, "Good morning, Yuer." "Good morning, Kong Kong." After feeding them, I opened the door and stretched. Perhaps because it was a day off, I felt particularly relaxed, and the island's morning appeared exceptionally beautiful. In the distance, the sun had just risen above the horizon, and seagulls lazily floated on the water, occasionally diving in with a splash to catch a small fish, which they would then carry to the rocks or branches to enjoy. The sea breeze gently caressed me, and the waves crashed rhythmically against the rocks, creating a soothing sound. The nearby coconut trees swayed slightly in the wind, and the entire island seemed to be performing a leisurely symphony. To my surprise, I discovered that today was a day of low tide, with the sea receding far beyond the shoreline. Such an opportunity is rare, and I couldn't miss the chance to go beachcombing. In a flash, I stripped down to just my shorts and boots, strapped on my homemade bamboo basket, and set off with my spear in hand. Upon reaching the rocky area, I began searching for targets in the puddles and crevices. Luck was on my side. In a shallow puddle, I spotted a fish wriggling like a water snake. It was a large eel. I quickly grabbed its head and swiftly placed it into my bamboo basket. Soon, my haul continued to grow. 2 stranded sea breams, a red snapper, a yellow snapper, a big octopus, along with 3 sizable pike crabs and a rock crab. Additionally, I dug up plenty of clams, razor clams, blood clams, and even caught several abalones, sea cucumbers, and conchs. After 3 hours, as the tide began to rise, my bamboo basket was filled to the brim, and I returned to the campsite, feeling quite satisfied. Back at the campsite, I picked 2 coconuts, preparing for a seafood feast. I divided all the seafood into 3 portions, placing them in a clay pot, adding some fresh water, and putting it over the fire to steam. While waiting, I sipped some coconut juice and devoured 2 large raw oysters. I have come to love the fresh, sweet taste of oysters, especially when squeezed with lemon juice. Their smooth texture is akin to eating a unique fruit. In contrast, the oysters I had in the past were utterly bland and fishy, while the oysters on the island tasted like a gourmet delight. The steamed seafood quickly cooked, and upon lifting the lid of the clay pot, a fragrant aroma wafted out. I poured the seafood onto a large leaf and savored every bite. The fish was tender, the crab sweet, and the sea cucumber and abalone had a delightful chewiness, each mouthful bursting with the flavor of the sea. The island's clear waters ensure the seafood is perfectly cooked, preserving its original taste without worrying about parasites. This meal brought an immense sense of satisfaction. After the feast, I leaned back under the cool shelter for a nap, the sea breeze gently caressing me and making me feel at ease. Gazing at the blue sky and white clouds, I gradually drifted into a light sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but a rustling sound suddenly woke me, growing louder as it approached. Blinking sleepily, I turned my head towards the sound and saw a plump brown bear casually walking away from me, its back turned. It had returned again, stealing my fish and planning to make a quick getaway. I shouted, "Put down the fish." But the bear merely glanced back at me before continuing its leisurely walk. I had long grown accustomed to its attacks. Although it had initially startled me, I gradually realized that this brown bear was just a mischievous little thief with no real threat to me. So, I decided to name it Shang Da, Bear Big, after shooing away Shang Da. I rested for a bit longer, despite the slight interruption to my nap. I got up, took a sip of coconut juice, and walked over to the drying rack to check on the food I was air drying. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a dark object near the fence. Upon closer inspection, oh my goodness! It was a plush teddy bear. Where did this come from? Am I still dreaming?